This is Eric Stark with Radio Arizona RV. I want to welcome you to the show today. And today the conversation is going to be about propane hoses, fittings, regulators. Not so much about in-depth technical information, how to replace things. We'll talk a little bit about regulators, but kind of explaining the fittings from the standpoint of how people come into my store, customers, and they ask, they want to do something. And, sometimes it's trying to just understand what they're trying to do and then them understanding what you're talking about. I always grab the hose, the fittings, and make sure they can see it and understand what's happening. Some places don't have all the hoses and fittings. They might be working out of a book. But nonetheless, it's from that viewpoint. And really, sometimes it's complicated because someone might not really be able to describe what they're trying to do. And then sometimes they get frustrated because the price of an adapter they might need is, $40 or $50, and then they have to buy a propane hose, which adds to it. But it's good to have this knowledge because when you go into the store and you're armed, you got a little more information, it makes it easier. It makes it a better purchase for you, an easier purchase. The store's happier because you're happy. And I will have pictures of all of the different fittings that are commonly used on an RV on our website at radioarizonarv.com. So you'll be able to see it. You could save those pictures. You could open up the website when you go in an RV store. I need this, this, and this. Or you'll be able to explain it to them, a little clearer knowledge, be able to speak their lingo, if you will. But I also want to add that when it comes to propane systems, do it right. Use the right tools. Don't use pliers. Use wrenches that are made for the fittings. Sometimes you have to use double wrenches to tighten the fitting into a fitting or something onto a tank. Don't skimp here and buy cheap propane regulators. There is some junk on the market. There is a brand that we won't carry in our store, or their propane fittings or hoses. It's junk in my eyes. Buy the good stuff. And ask the store, to be honest, do you get a lot of these propane regulators returned? If they have more than 3 a year, they've got a problem. And that's not a lot, but I'll tell you, when it comes to propane, it is, because typically they should never be defective. Now, it does happen, but if they're getting, I said 2 to 3, that would probably be more like 4 to 5. I know we've gone for years without any ever returned. There was a company called Marshall Brass and Marshall Gas. They made an awesome product. They went out of business. We would never get their product back. So always buy the good stuff, the quality name. And generally, it's going to be a company that specializes in propane. They don't make dish drainers and holding tank chemicals and sewer hoses. And I'm giving you a hint here of who the company is. Their propane stuff is horrible. So safety first. Always spray down your fittings after you're done with the propane tanks open to make sure there's no leaks. Use a liquid propane leak detector that bubbles up, or make your own with dish soap and water. Spray it on. As long as it bubbles up, you're good. And so with the propane regulator, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. I'm going to have to do this in several episodes because there's a lot of ground to cover with this stuff, and I really don't like doing long episodes, where you're just sitting here for 30 minutes or 40 minutes listening to me ramble about whatever. It's easier to do it in smaller episodes. You can get the portion you need, and I'll have that broke down on the website. In fact, this will probably be 3 or 4 episodes to really just make it simple. 2 for sure. So I'm going to start off with propane regulators, and I'm going to talk about them on a fifth wheel trailer or a travel trailer or even a toy hauler, either way. Most of these trailers have 2 propane tanks. There's some that have just 1, but most have 2. And so you have a regulator that has 2 lines coming out of it. It's an automatic switchover regulator, and that's pretty standard. They've been around forever, and it's standard equipment. And they're not that big of a deal to replace. The main thing is just checking for leaks when you're done, using the proper sealants on the fittings if it requires them, You know, and a lot of propane fittings don't require sealants, whereas a few of them do, and there's specific ones that do. Replace the regulator. Obviously, you're doing it because it's quit working. You have no pressure inside the RV, or it's leaking someplace. You smell propane, you zeroed it in, the vent hole's leaking, or maybe where it's crimped together, one of those crimps is leaking. But while you're replacing that, strongly consider replacing the propane hoses at the same time. You know, this isn't a plug for RV stores to sell more propane hoses. It's actually a safety issue, and you already have it apart, and it might add an extra $30 to the cost of the job, but it's done. And then the other reason why, too, is what I've found in the stores, people come in, they want to buy the propane regulator, and maybe it's $40, $44, whatever it is. A little bit of sticker shock there, especially if they've had some defective ones. Maybe they replaced one 2 years ago and one 3 years prior to that, so they feel like they're always replacing these. And it gets expensive, and they don't like spending the money on it. I understand. I completely understand that. But just undoing those propane hoses, it moves them. They've kind of formed to a shape, and you're probably not ever going to really get it back on the way it was. And what happens is when that propane hose gets formed into that shape, it's pulling on the fitting. And the crimp ring that holds the propane hose on over time will loosen up, and you get a propane leak there. And sometimes they buy the regulator. No, my hoses are fine. You know, half an hour they're back in the store buying the hoses because they leaked after they got it all back together. So it's easier to just do it while you have it apart. You know, I know it gets expensive, but safety is important, and it actually saves time and probably money anyways, going back to the store, making your trips. So you want to replace those. And propane hoses are pretty straightforward. They're not complicated. There's a couple different kinds of fittings that they have on them. From 2000 onward, all propane tanks have what is called an Acme thread on it. It's a big, large threaded fitting. And inside of that Acme thread is what is called the POL fitting. So a POL propane hose could actually fit in there, a propane hose with a POL fitting. And the POL fitting is that brass end on a propane hose. It's got a rounded nose on it. They've been around forever. Those aren't as popular today. They're being used for certain things. They're still floating around out there. You can still buy propane hoses with those on them because they do work in the newer tanks from 2000 on with the Acme thread on it. It goes right inside of it rather than around it. So your propane or your regulator is going to have one or the other. More than likely, it'll have Acme threads on it. And then on the other end of the line, it's going to have either a 1/4 inch male pipe thread fitting, or it's going to have a 1/4 inch inverted pipe thread fitting. Or excuse me, inverted flare fitting, not pipe thread, inverted flare fitting. And they're not interchangeable, and it's pretty straightforward. When you go to the dealer or to the dealership or the RV parts store, just bring these parts with you. They'll see you walking in with them, and they'll just know exactly what to give you. They'll match them up, and here you go. And the only thing to match up on the hose is the fittings and the length of it, and you're set. And, you know, there's rubber hoses or stainless steel hoses you can get today. The stainless steel is, you know, quote unquote, better. It's going to last longer. That's the thought behind it. We sell them in our store, and I do think they will last longer, especially in environments where if they're exposed to the sun at all, you know, you keep the sun off the rubber. You know, and it's stainless steel hoses have always been around. They're used in race cars and airplanes and jets and so forth, so they are better quality hose, and they don't cost that much more, so you might want to consider that. So you're going to take the regulator, you're going to take the hoses, and all this is straightforward. When you look at the regulator, there's nothing tricky to taking this off. There's nothing complicated about this. You know, a couple wrenches, a screwdriver, and you're set. And when you put it all back together, you're going to want to check every fitting with soapy water with both tanks open, make sure there's no leaks anywhere. And if you're replacing a regulator on a motorhome, it's very similar, except you just have one tank. So there's only one fitting or one propane or one hose going to it. So it's the same principle. It's not attached to a bracket. It just screws right into the tank though. You know, so it's fairly simple. Actually, it's really simple. The main thing is just to check the leaks, check for leaks when you're done. And you really can't mess up. The fittings aren't interchangeable, so you can't screw that up. You know, what comes off goes back on. It's straightforward. And the RV store will be able to help you with that. Even the most green person in an RV store should be able to help you with that. So that's dealing with the propane regulators. So now, when it comes to the rest of the propane system, it's pretty straightforward. There's different fittings that are used on your appliances, but most of your appliances will always have a 3/8 male flare fitting on it. So that means a 3/8 female flared line will be attaching to it. And those things generally don't go bad. A lot of those are copper tubing, and the copper doesn't really, sometimes it'll get a hole in it or a kink, if you're not careful. The fitting might loosen up a little bit and you'll have to tighten it. And those fittings, the flared fittings, whether it's regular flare or inverted flare, do not have to have Teflon tape or any kind of sealant put on them. They're self-sealing. Just like a POL fitting, it has that rounded nose because it's self-sealing. Some of those have a O-ring on it, so they're self-sealing. So you don't use Teflon tape on those. There's no need to. So I'm gonna stop here, and we're gonna just do another episode to break this up. I don't want to keep going on this. We've talked about the regulator, kind of getting these propane fittings a little bit. So I want to stop here, and we'll do another episode and get into more of this. That way, if you're just listening for the regulator, you got what you need, and you can move on. And if you want to listen for something else, you'll be able to listen to for another episode. I'm clearly marked. So I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode number 22 on Radio Arizona RV about propane. And also a reminder to be safe when you're using propane. Always check for leaks. Don't get lazy when it comes to that. Check for those leaks. So we're going to, again, thank everybody. And this is Eric Stark with Radio Arizona RV.